nonprofit rather than the work that the nonprofit is expected to do. And there are several well-researched charts that you can look up to find out this kind of information on quite a few of the big nonprofit organizations. And so you can see why there is a fundamental reason why we're focusing on ethics within organizations in this course. So turn to page 3 in your textbook, for example. Here is a list of some grotesque abuses, questionable practices, of instances within organizations that just went all wrong. Notice, of course, that first one, it says Pfizer, the producer of Viagra, Zoloft, and Lipitor, was fined $2.3 billion by federal prosecutors for illegal drug promotions that plied doctors with free golf, massages, and resort junkets. That's trips. Similarly, Allergan, the maker of Botox, that stuff they put in people's faces to take out the wrinkles, settled for $600 million on charges that it illegally promoted and sold the drug for unapproved purposes. Botox actually is a bad thing. Bernie Madoff, who this goes back to 2008, and I know that's 10 years ago now, although it doesn't seem like that way to me. But Bernie Madoff is just very well known, who pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies and admitted to turning his wealth management business into a giant Ponzi scheme, which means that you use other people's money to pay the profits that you promised somebody else, and it just keeps going down and down. Of course, the person at the top garnered the most profits out of all of this. He is currently serving 150-year prison sentence without parole. He is 79 years old now, by the way. And he had to turn over from his bank accounts and his estate $17 billion because of this. He ruined a lot of people. A lot of people lost their entire retirement fund, so that, you thought you were 74 years old and had money for retirement for the rest of your life, but now you have to go back to work and start all over again. Martha Stewart was convicted of securities fraud and spent 5 months in prison. It was a cushy prison, but still it was prison for lying. And of course, no list would be complete without mentioning any big pharma like Pfizer. And there are several others on here at the bottom of the page 3 as well. Or we should mention, it's not on page 3, but all the things that have happened within the NFL, from football players who were protected when they were accused of any number of crimes, most often like domestic abuse. And rehired back in, and this whole thing with the whole kneeling during the national anthem that the NFL has had to deal with. There is, of course, the Catholic Church with the priests that abused young boys. Not only did priests abuse the boys, but then the bishops higher up, when they found out about it, covered up and just moved the priests around. They didn't really do anything to the priests that were found to have done this. Or the military, all right, so for engaging in horrible, sexist, misogynist behavior, especially against female military personnel. Or the Obama Secret Service agents who were caught in Argentina with prostitutes, or any other number of things that have happened. So there are no organizations that are exempt from falling down in the ethics department. And if there ever was a time that leaders thought ethics could be a relative sort of thing, what is ethical to me might not be ethical to you, that kind of thing, that time has definitely ended. Many leaders have learned that ethics improves organizational performance and ultimately the bottom line. And although there are many that are ethical because they know that's a good thing, and they are ethical people, for the most part, most employees, whether they behave ethically or not, prefer to believe that the work that they do is ethical. And they perform better working in an ethical environment. So next, beginning on page 6 of your textbook, you will see a little bit of organizational history, at least in skeletal form, beginning in the 1950s. You will, as you read through on page 6, it says, have we learned anything from the past? It doesn't give a very bright history of organizations and ethics. It sounds like we have decades and decades and decades of just like really poor, bad, unethical behavior. One television show about the advertising agency, Mad Men.
Yep.
Mad Men covers all of that, and I think that's from the 60s, where it was just like it's all the almighty dollar, where profits are what is really important. So we know that greed and corruption are definitely a part of our history. Now, Richard Sennett, in his book, The Corrosion of Character, questions what happens in a society if the main characteristics of economic activities and work are neither long-term nor stable, but are flexible and short-term, setting the pace for all other activities and thus reforming people's identities. What this means is that we don't worry about something that in the long term, we're going to go through some rough spots up here short term, but in the long term it will be great. Instead, when we focus on short-term gains, it allows us to compromise ourselves ethically to a greater extent and more often. It takes up the complicated question of character, which could be defined as the moral dimension of a person's identity, and its integrity with regard to changes in the current working life and, of course, the institutions in which they work, which are based on short-term projects. So what happens to the person whose goal it is to be the number one top salesperson? This one person gets, bonuses and a trip to Tahiti. So what will you do to get that position, to get that place? What happens to an organization that superficially meets certain standards, but has no intention of fulfilling the spirit of the requirement, such as hiring quotas based on gender or race, age, or military service? If the third quarter bottom line shows a 14% increase over the last 3 quarters, does it matter what it took to do that or what the consequences long term might be? So we use the lessons of the past to make the future a better place. Yes? How? Ethical dilemmas often are the result not of clear-cut right and wrong decision-making, but of sliding scales and a lot of gray and a lot of competing value systems. For example, in stem cell research, opponents and proponents argue based on the need either to save lives, yes, or the moral reprehensibility of using stem cells taken from aborted fetuses. So other dilemmas might include justice versus mercy, truth versus loyalty, individuals versus the community, and short-term versus long-term goals. So should a boss show mercy on an employee who has made a costly blunder, or should the boss punish that employee? When a higher level employee finds out that a significant downsizing is imminent and a friend lower down will be fired, should the employee tell the friend the truth or remain loyal to the company? When an employee conducts a safety study that suggests a product is unsafe for public use, should the employee remain loyal to his or her company by staying silent, or should the employee risk their job by informing the public? This actually happened in the space shuttle program. The space shuttle exploded in the mid-1980s because of this. As this is a communication class, we will obviously focus on communication issues residing within these dilemmas. It is fair to ask, how do we communicate about ethics within an organization? Is reading about the ethical rule in an employee handbook enough? Are posters in the break room enough? Are ethical considerations given through lip service but not in practice? Are we hypocritical in expecting others to do as I say but not as I do? Are exceptions to rules common? Do we expect management to have a certain level of bleeding heart? Are there different expectations in ethical dilemmas for men and for women? Are ethical codes even enforceable? Are ethics a matter of relativity? Now, research shows that different ethical perspectives lead to quite different conclusions regarding what constitutes ethical behavior. These differences are based on fundamental assumptions about the character of reality, the nature of individuals, and the obligation of individuals to each other. These tensions or differences are likely to either enable or constrain ethical action. For our purposes, the two most relevant tensions are foundational and situational tension. So this has a lot to do with situational ethics. So is the behavior, ethical behavior, based on a set of actions that are constant or determined by context? So foundational ethics says, of course, that they are, there is a set reality. It is a given. It's like in concrete and stone. It's self-evident. It's objective. Everybody knows this. Murder is wrong. Okay. Situational ethics says you have to look at the context. So is murder wrong if I finally got a chance to kill my very abusive husband who almost killed me 2 weeks ago? Man, he's asleep. He's drunk. I can set the house on fire now and leave, right? And that's okay, right? It's considered self-defense. That would be situational. There are also these tensions that revolve within the individual and the community. We tend to be, in our society, we consider ourselves very individualistic, more than communitarian. However, much of our action is very much communitarian. If you consider the fact that we all understand and pretty much all follow the rules of driving on the right side of the street, stopping at the stop signs, using our turn indicators, going up and down stairs in the proper way, because if we don't do this, then conflict arises. And so we're very much attuned to behaving under certain communitarian standards, but we also give certainly a lot of credence to doing those things which are very important to us, relevant to us individually. So let's look on page 13 then of your text and talk about what our ethical responsibility for any organization happens to be. AT&T, we tend to think of as the phone service, right? Do they have any kind of ethical responsibility to sponsor football stadiums? Does Coca-Cola have an ethical responsibility to sponsor the Olympics? Does the local bank have any kind of responsibility to sponsor the Little League soccer teams? Does any organization have a responsibility to even stay in business? What is required to stay in business? What happens when an organization collapses or goes out of business? What is the impact? And we can look at examples of this using our own president when he had a casino or 2 casinos, or I don't know, maybe even several, in Atlantic City. And Atlantic City, about 10 years ago, well, it was in the reception, so maybe a little bit more, went through, it just collapsed. It would be like Las Vegas collapsing, only this was Atlantic City. And thousands upon thousands of people lost their jobs. Not just people that worked in the casinos, but every industry associated with all of the casinos and with those buildings. So all of the contract labor, all of the restaurants, all of the janitors, the whole works, everything connected with that industry collapsed. Did they have an ethical responsibility to maintain certain business practices to make a certain kind of profit in order to prevent these kind of collapses? Should they have done other things to prevent this entire system to collapse? And so there are many questions to what the obligations of any organization happen to be. Be sure to read about the dilemma that the economist Milton Friedman regarding the fundamental responsibility of any business is on page 13. This is where it is talking about, Friedman said, in light of the questions that I just gave to you, that the responsibility, obviously, ultimately, for any business is to remain in business, which means to make a profit. That is their only responsibility, because as soon as their profit ends, then all kinds of mayhem begin. And so it's important at all times to keep in mind that all businesses in a capitalist society must make a profit. Now, St. Thomas Aquinas, he's going back a couple of thousand years almost, wrote of 4 cardinal virtues that were fundamental to creating the good man. Pardon the sexist wording, but of course, in his time, he meant that literally, but in our time, we understand that the good person, folks, must keep in mind that of all the virtues, there are 4. Virtue is a standard of behavior. It has to do with your character. And he said there are 4 cardinal, or the ones that are on top of all the virtues listed. If you go online under stevepavlina.com, he lists like 400 or more values. And some of these, a good many of these, have to do with virtuous behavior, good behavior. Thomas Aquinas is saying that these are the top 4. Please take note of these. Number 1 is prudence. Prudence is an intellectual value. It involves acts of reason. A prudent person needs to be solicitous or shrewd about and quick to do what one ought to do. So this means that you need to make good decisions. You need to be able to very quickly determine short-term, long-term, weigh these against each other. The impacts of the decision, you need to be able to see the whole big picture, people, right? That's deliberating well. Also judging rightly so that people are not negatively impacted. And then commanding what one should or should not do and following through. That is a prudent person. Justice deals, of course, with what is right. It directs humans in their relations to other humans. Aquinas recognized 4 kinds of rights. Positive rights are those things that are given to us. We're talking about through contracts and understanding that these things are in existence. If I give you this, you give me that in return. It's there's something positive, a positive exchange there. That's a positive right. Divine rights, of course, are those rights given to us by God, such as life. Common rights of the people are those that we consider natural rights. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, of course, is what is considered the Bill of Rights that are in our Constitution. Those are called common rights. And paternal rights, which understands the idea of status. If I have higher status over you, I have obligations, moral obligations or responsibilities to you, like a noblesse oblige kind of thing. He's talking about, especially family. Parents have a responsibility to take care of children and whatnot. For Aquinas, that also included slavery, but we won't talk about that. The third virtue is fortitude, which is a moral virtue, by which one resists difficulties that repel the will from acting according to reason. So this means that you have something inside that in light of something, what was the word I'm looking for? Temptation, that you are able to resist it. Fortitude says you have the character to resist temptation. So the brave person acts for the sake of goodness rather than for their own personal welfare. So it's not for the trophy, it's to save other people, right? Temperance concerns moderation. So this means that you are able to control yourself. That fried chicken is really good, but the whole bucket of fried chicken is not very good, right, for you. And so you're able to resist that. And so that would be temperance. So beyond both Friedman, which says that business is supposed to make a profit, you have an obligation, and Aquinas, it says we're supposed to have certain virtues to remain people of character. We also, in our text on pages 14 through 19, you will see that the text will talk about, make sure you read this, duty, rights, utility, virtue again, and relationship. So unless you are the knight extraordinaire, Lancelot du Lac, from King Arthur's Round Table, this whole take on ethical standards and virtue and morality may seem nice and great and altruistic, but very often unreal and unattainable in real situations. I get it. But high ethical ground should be no less achievable than making a lot of money, which is something we also want to do. You should feel limited to merely, you should not feel limited to merely applying these altruistic perspectives to the various cases in the text or others we bring to class. You should feel free to evaluate your comfort or discomfort with the ethical perspectives themselves. Is it even humanly possible for us to remain completely ethical within certain situations? All right, we're getting down to the end here. On page 21 of the text, at the bottom, you will see what the author believes is an ethical, what an ethical organization does. These 6 actions help keep an organization ethical, and all 6 actions require human input. So it isn't like they happen in a vacuum. It isn't like you put them on the paper and then that makes it true. It requires all the people then to engage in those actions. However, these 6 focal points allow organizations, some of which are massive, to not only continue in existence, but to thrive, both financially and otherwise, and contribute to the greater good. And this is good and important. We want to understand that although with Friedman it is good to make a profit, it is not the profit in and of itself outside of an ethical foundation that that organizations consider. First, alignment has to do with people behave according to the posters in the break room. So if the poster says, we believe in these things, then people actually do that. And the mission and vision statements correspond with this. Dialogic communication means not only is there two-way communication between management and the workforce, but also between the organization itself and the community at large. Participation means that the employees themselves are empowered to behave ethically and to not behave unethically. There is a culture of trust, and employees believe in and participate in the production of a product. And this is important, like I said earlier, that most people prefer to work in an ethical environment. Transparency means that explanations from the management are normal, trust and truth are normal, and there's minimal secrecy. I say minimal, not complete lack of. There are some things, obviously, that have to be secret, like the formula to Coca-Cola, which is kept in a secret vault. Accountability, of course, means that it is open and public. It is published. It is available to not only the employees but to the public at large. That the organization will willingly admit wrongdoing and will correct wrong actions, and they will take responsibility not only to the organization and to the employees, but to planet Earth as far as the environment and, of course, the community at large, other people. And finally, courage. Employees who have the courage to identify, assess, and resolve ethical dilemmas should always be the norm. And rejection of conformity that is damaging. So not all conformity, obviously, is bad. We all want ourselves to, mind our own business and work at our computers and not to cheat, not to get other people's passwords. There are certain, obviously, rules of behavior that require conformity, but any conformity that is wrong, such as groupthink, and the ability then to then speak out against this, and the willingness to take immediate actions, even at great loss of short-term profit, knowing that long-term it behooves the organization. So, whoo, boy, let's have fun this semester digging in the dirt, because we're going to dig in some dirt this semester. Pay attention to the outside world, please. Read the news. Pay attention or listen to the news. Read the news. I don't know, get news somehow. Bring it into the classroom. Find those examples of current issues that you come across. In addition to what's in the book, this is not something that is my sole responsibility. This is something that you have responsibility for as well. You are still responsible for reading that introduction that I briefly went over. Make sure that you take notes. I gave you some information that's not in the chapter. Make sure you take notes on that and that you've got that covered. Make sure you read case 3 before class. Remember that the very first reflection is due before class next Wednesday on the introduction and that case 3, which has to do with the Walmart effect. Yes, we're going to start with Walmart on here. Okay, so before class, write that first reflection. Look at the guidelines, instructions on Sakai. Make sure you follow those and get that uploaded into Sakai. I will lecture on leadership trait theory on next Wednesday, and the rest of the class will be devoted to class discussion. And folks, that's a stinking lot of class discussion here. What that means is that you've got to be on top of this. You need to come in with a lot of questions, a lot of comments, a lot of perspectives. You need to kind of comb the internet, Google a little bit, right? Find stuff to bring in, not only about Walmart, but other examples such as Target or JCPenney's or whatever, big box, big places, retail places, right? Come to class prepared and ready to discuss, ask, and share. Feel free to do a little Google search and don't allow your own biases and prejudices to guide you. So don't limit yourself to what you think, you feel, you believe, or what your opinion is. Feel free, please, compel yourself to go outside of those parameters and to look in as many angles as you possibly can so that we can discuss them. The fact that you bring them doesn't mean you agree with them. It means you found them and they are discussable. So thank you very much. I don't know how long this was. I don't think it was too long, but take note of all of this, and I will see you on Wednesday, the 17th.